Eduardo Bolsonaro, right? For a while now, we've kind of noticed that either he's having cognitive problems or he's just really desperate, right? What happened? He gave an interview to a YouTube channel and he made a statement that I found very revealing and at the same time very serious, macabre. The way he said it, you know? It seemed like for him, if that happens, it's all fine. The way he said it. What did he say? I'll show you. But first, let me explain. He said that Flávio Bolsonaro needs to be very careful because he could be assassinated. See that, right? Soon, no kidding, we have the setup, right? From the Bolsonaro family, that situation of playing the victim, acting like a victim, and running away from debates. And it's interesting that I even commented on today's live earlier about this, right? How Flávio Bolsonaro is going to act in the debates because now Flávio is already avoiding the press. Flávio is avoiding the journalists so he doesn't have to talk about or explain the issue of the money that was for the movie, money that wasn't for the movie, money that went to the United States, and so on. If there were transfers and amounts that went to Eduardo Bolsonaro and so on, they are avoiding the press. What is he going to do to avoid the debate? That's the situation. Because he is running for president and there will be debates. What is he going to do? His father, do you remember in 2022, ran away from the debates because of the stabbing, right? He didn't participate in the debates, putting himself as a martyr, as a victim, as someone who was persecuted, right? And so on. And this statement from Eduardo Bolsonaro raises a red flag, right? There could be a setup coming. And honestly, I don't doubt it. I'm not saying that it will happen, but I wouldn't doubt that the Bolsonaro family is capable of coming up with a scheme so that Flávio Bolsonaro doesn't have to participate in the debates. Because if he goes to the debates, he'll have to explain what he's not explaining now. And in fact, he's even avoiding the press today. And notice, I'll show you now, notice the way Eduardo Bolsonaro speaks, which gave me the impression that for Eduardo Bolsonaro, it doesn't matter if Flávio Bolsonaro is murdered or not. I'm not saying that he said that. I'm saying that the way he expressed himself maybe reveals the truth, because that's what it seemed like. As if the brother was threatening the other and it didn't matter what. The thing is, you can't lose the elections and we can't lose that opportunity to take power in Brazil. And I'll show you. You know, I'm not the type to show this. I usually prefer to explain things. But honestly, I thought the way Eduardo Bolsonaro expressed himself was very unfortunate. I would even say it was macabre, the way he expressed himself, as if maybe there was some feeling along those lines. And I want to emphasize that, as I said, actually, in the earlier live stream, I want Flávio Bolsonaro. I want Flávio in the debates. I want Flávio Bolsonaro there together with Lula, the two of them debating there so that people can see and know who is really the best. We want Flávio in the election. As I said, it will be very important for them to lose again and be defeated in another presidential election. It's a big mistake if the Bolsonaro supporters think we're afraid of Flávio or that we don't want Flávio. We want Flávio, but we want the full Flávio. He needs to take part in the debates and put himself out there as a presidential candidate and not running away. What a pain. It's a setup. Let's look here and see if you notice the impression I got that for Eduardo, everything is fine. Look at this here. Let's look at it together. Oh, pay attention. I'll enlarge it. Look here.
Flavio really needs to be careful about his safety. It will be more and more worth it to assassinate him.
Hey, it will be more and more worth it to assassinate him. Look at the way he said it. Flavio has to be very careful about his safety. Everyone has to be careful about their safety, especially presidential candidates. But it will be increasingly worthwhile to assassinate him. He speaks in a very unfortunate way, very macabre, which gives the impression that for them, it's all fine, it doesn't matter, as long as they have the power. I'm gonna play it again here because it's really weird, you know? The way these people talk, it's just horrible. Pay attention.
Is it already more worthwhile to assassinate him?
Go back a little.
Be careful about his safety. Assassinating him becomes more worthwhile because without Flavio, who remains? There are the people we know, the people on the right we know, right? Because we talk about these things.
Like nobody wants Flavio Bolsonaro dead. And this statement here, implying that the other side wants that, actually the way he expressed himself, it seems like they're the ones who want it as long as it guarantees that Lula loses the elections. It's a horrible, macabre thing. How far will these people go with this madness for power, folks? I hope he's doing very well in very good health so he can take part in the debates because he has a lot to explain. Situations like these, which he isn't even explaining now. But in the debate, he won't be able to run away unless there's some kind of setup. Right? These people are really weird. Then he came and said that people, the folks on the left, use political violence and so on, and we know that's not the case, right? They're exactly the ones who are extremely violent, but when it's time for them to play the victim, then they say it's the left that's violent. Now, what he said was very violent and very macabre, and to me, it might mean a lot more than it seems. See? And we want Flavio in the debate in good health because he has a lot to explain to Brazil. Like for example, this connection with Daniel Vorcaro, which he still hasn't explained. It's a lot of money for the movie, a movie that offers so little. The release of this movie is on September 11th. In the pre-election period, which we know will serve as political propaganda, we know that their idea is exactly that, to use the movie to try to convince people to vote for Flávio Bolsonaro. But I've already told you, and I have the feeling that the release of this movie with our previous one, showing the connection between Flávio Bolsonaro and Daniel Vorcaro, who has transferred more than 90% of the movie's budget so far. Where they haven't explained who the other investors are, who gave the money, nothing so far. And we know that the money went to a fund in Texas whose main person responsible is Eduardo Bolsonaro's lawyer. And at the same time as the largest transfer, which was on February 3rd of last year, in that same month, Eduardo Bolsonaro went to the United States. And they don't explain any of this. They don't provide any documents. They don't show any transfers, nothing. It's a very expensive movie for very little. And I have the feeling that with this work we're doing by questioning this and what do we want? Investigation. Exactly because we want to know the truth. Now, Flávio Bolsonaro could and should come forward and explain, presenting documents and explain himself, and he is avoiding the press. For someone who wants to be president of the republic, if you're a public figure, they have to explain a lot of things. Yes, and he doesn't explain anything. So I have the impression that in September, this situation with this movie will actually work against Flávio Bolsonaro and not in his favor. Because we will keep showing and talking. Soon the candidacy will be registered. The PL is close to scheduling the party conventions for July 25th to actually decide the candidate of Eduardo Flávio Bolsonaro and the vice president. They haven't found the vice president to be his running mate yet. Because, guys, there's just no way. So they have until August 5th for the conventions and the registration of the candidacy. On August 15th, the electoral campaign already starts. There will be debates and all that. And with that, new evidence will emerge and new developments will be revealed. And he will have a lot to explain in the debates since he is avoiding the press. No, and we'll see what happens. Let's wait for Flávio to officially register his candidacy so we can really, for sure, start revealing all the corruption and schemes of Flávio Bolsonaro. That's the situation. And there will be nowhere to run. Now, let's see if he's going to run away from the debates or not. What do you think? I'm not going to lie to you. I'm afraid there's a scheme to keep him out of the debates. And what kind of scheme would that be, Andrea Gonçalves? A temporary physical incapacity? If the person is physically unable to participate in the debate, they're not required to attend the debate. And this can even be portrayed as an attack, as a situation that will make him look like a victim, like a poor, miserable guy. And I'll reiterate, with this statement from Eduardo Bolsonaro, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some kind of setup like that. And we need to stay alert. We need to keep showing it. We need to keep reiterating what is being uncovered. And we really need investigations and progress towards holding those responsible accountable. Because if we want an investigation, it's exactly because we want to find those responsible, the evidence, and that everything is truly revealed to the Brazilian people. And what should there be? Justice, so that we know who Flávio Bolsonaro is. So that you, if you have to vote for him, you vote with full awareness, knowing who he is. And that no one is deceived. For that, what do we wish for? Health. So that he is fully fit and ready for the debates, where he will have to explain what he isn't explaining now. In fact, he's even avoiding the journalists. See? Here, look, meanwhile, the removal of Davi Alcolumbre and also Ciro Nogueira from their positions was requested. Soraya Tronic asked the Federal Supreme Court and the National Congress to remove Ciro Nogueira. And the Novo Party also requested the removal of the President of the Senate, Davi Alcolumbre, from his position. What's happening? In Daniel Vocaro's plea bargain, which the federal police rejected, I think the Attorney General's office will reject it too. I'll discuss this soon. It was the first time Daniel Vocaro confessed that he was paying bribes. To whom? To, according to Daniel Vocaro, in the plea bargain, he paid a bribe to Davi Alcolumbre, Senator and President of the Federal Senate. And he said it was 150 million. This money was sent out of Brazil to disguise the payment, and then it was transferred to him. According to Daniel Vocaro himself in his plea bargain testimony, according to what was even reported by the São Paulo police. São Paulo Police, não, veja Magazine. And Daniel Vocaro also testified and said it was a bribe payment to Ciro Nogueira. Ciro Nogueira, senator and former chief of staff under Bolsonaro, according to the federal police, yes, the police, was receiving a monthly allowance of 300 to 500,000, all of it to benefit them, right? In the case of Davi Alcolumbre, for example, Davi Alcolumbre's state injected several million reais into Daniel Vocaro's scam, into his bank fraud. The bribe payments might just be a big monthly payoff. You send public money to me, and I give a part of that money back to you. Anyway, that's something the federal police will have to find out and talk about those details. The Novo Party requested the removal of Davi Alcolumbre from the position of senator and from the presidency of the Federal Senate. And also Soraya Troni, who requested the removal of Ciro Noguera. How does this removal happen? It can happen by a decision of the Federal Supreme Court, or it can, or rather it should happen through the Ethics Council of the respective house. Obviously, the Ethics Council in today's National Congress doesn't really serve to punish dishonest parliamentarians who break parliamentary decorum or ethics. In fact, today, the ethics committees are being used to go after those who go against the system from within. For example, Glauber Braga, who has now returned to his duties because his mandate was suspended for 6 months. So politically and ethically, they won't be removed. What's left about the Supreme Federal Court? The Supreme Federal Court can remove a senator or deputy from office. Depending on the evidence of involvement and given a very important factor, attempts to interfere with the investigation, trying to destroy evidence, or trying to intimidate witnesses. This is not only grounds for removal from political office, whoever it may be, but also grounds for pretrial detention. So this would require this evidentiary framework for the Supreme Court to then order the removal of both. Did you understand, my dear? And who would do that? By a single justice ruling, a priori, the case's rapporteur, who is exactly Andre Mendonça. But I believe that's not very feasible at this moment. At this level of investigation that we're at, I believe that won't happen for now. It will need a more robust body of evidence for anyone to be removed, because that's a very serious measure. Now, I have to tell you something. That's why I even put up this photo. What happened? There will be an event in New York, UN event. So Davi Alcolumbre, president of the Federal Senate, who let's say was named by Daniel Vorcaro, chose a senator to represent the Federal Senate at this event in the United States. And among the 81 senators, who does Davi Alcolumbre choose? Exactly the one who was subject to searches and seizures by the federal police a few weeks ago, and the information that Daniel Vorcaro had implicated him was leaked, which is exactly Ciro Noguera. In the same criminal case, which involves fraud and Daniel Vorcaro's mafia. Both Davi Alcolumbre and Ciro Noguera. Then Davi Alcolumbre can choose someone to represent the Senate, and he goes and chooses exactly Ciro Noguera. The police have to investigate people. He may have gone there just for the event in New York to represent the Senate. But it could be that he went there for other reasons. To coerce witnesses. To buy witnesses. To destroy evidence. Why? Because Daniel Vorcaro's crime is involved. We contacted this Havergate fund to find out where the millions he laundered through the film went. It was to this fund in the United States. We're talking about the United States. New York is in the United States. And who is there in the United States? Eduardo Bolsonaro. Pretty soon, if we're not careful, we'll find out that Flávio was collecting money here in Brazil and Eduardo was receiving it over there in the United States. Because coincidence or not, the person responsible for the fund that the millions for the movie went to is Eduardo Bolsonaro's lawyer over there in the United States. And the coincidence is that the government decision chosen by Davi Alcolumbre was reported to go to the United States. Where there is an important center of connection with this Daniel Vorcaro mafia plot, notably involving Bolsonaro's film. Let me ask you something. Why isn't Ciro Noguera wearing an ankle monitor? Why hasn't Ciro Noguera's passport been seized? The federal police raised serious suspicions that he was receiving a monthly allowance, bribe payments every month from Daniel Volcaro, ranging from 300 to 500,000 reais. And now he's going to the United States. With everything paid for by the Senate, handpicked. Davi Alcolumbre, who was implicated by Daniel Volcaro. What are they waiting for? For them to destroy evidence, to coordinate their testimonies? Is that what they're waiting for? So that in the end, nothing happens? So that everything gets swept under the rug? So this makes me a bit concerned. This slowness, this inertia, because we're talking, guys, about many billions of reais. It's a lot of money to recruit, to buy, to influence, to intimidate, to coerce. Besides a lot of money, we're talking about people who are in positions of power. Senators, congressmen, former president, presidential candidate. And if it stays this slow, soon the evidence will be destroyed, stories will be coordinated, and witnesses will be intimidated. That's why I hope the federal police are all over this and are investigating all of this, all these moves. I hope so. Because this, in fact, if it's proven, is a direct cause for preventive detention. And it will provide the necessary framework for even removing these people from their positions. Oh, Andrea, but they have parliamentary immunity. Parliamentary immunity does not prevent pretrial detention. Parliamentary immunity only prevents arrest in flagrante delicto for a bailable offense. That prevents it. Because a parliamentarian can only be arrested in flagrante delicto for a non-bailable offense. But with pretrial detention, he can be arrested at any time. Nevertheless, the respective house to which he is linked, in this specific case, the Senate, the plenary can overturn the arrest determined by the judiciary. Do you understand, my dear? But nothing prevents pretrial detention. No, Andrea, it's still too early for pretrial detention. All right? I even agree with you. I agree. But why didn't you put on an ankle monitor? Why didn't you seize the passport? At least that. Okay, you don't want to put on an ankle monitor? Then don't. But why didn't you seize the passport? These people keep traveling back and forth. How did Flávio Bolsonaro go to the United States to meet with Eduardo Bolsonaro? Where did the money go in the US? Attention. They're being way too lenient, you know. If it were a poor black criminal, they'd have been in jail a long time ago. But since they're white-collar criminals, deputies, senators, and all those people, then it's all hands off, hands off, hands off, hands off. Soon it'll all be swept under the rug and they'll still keep bothering us. So, for God's sake, right? Meanwhile, the Attorney General has to speak up. Like I told you, if it were a poor black person, they'd already be in jail. They'd have been locked up a long time ago. But since it's a white-collar criminal wearing a suit and tie, there's all this sluggishness. What are they waiting for? The Attorney General must make a statement about 3 situations that he hasn't commented on yet. The first issue the Attorney General has to address, whether he will accept or not Daniel Volcaro's plea bargain. Here it is, look. The Attorney General will have to comment. Will he accept Daniel Volcaro's plea bargain? The federal police already rejected it. Is the Attorney General the final authority? If they accept the plea bargain, it's approved. Whether it will have the effect the criminal wants or not is another matter. That's something the judiciary will decide later on. The judge later on during the sentencing phase will decide if the plea bargain is accepted, whether there will be a reduction of the sentence, judicial pardon, and so on. These are different things, but for the acceptance of the plea bargain, the public prosecutor's office is essential. Extremely important. The federal police already rejected it, and I think the prosecutor general will too. what's happening? Daniel Vorcaro is shielding some politicians. And according to insider information, he's trying to shield Flávio Bolsonaro with the hope that Flávio Bolsonaro can be elected president of the republic. And that way, he would grant him a presidential pardon if he gets convicted in the future. So he's holding back and doesn't want to turn Flávio in. This is one of the conversations and lines of investigation, including backstage discussions. Now, for Flávio to win these elections, given the current context, it would only happen if there were a really big scheme. A really big one. Otherwise, there's just no way, guys. That's why he's dropping in the polls. Highlight your question and I'll answer it today at 8 p.m., okay? Did you get it? There's no way. But coming from these people, that's why I gave the warning at the beginning of the live stream. Coming from these people, they're capable of anything, even setting something up to gain power, to stay in power, living off the perks. And they say, we are anti-system. But in reality, they were never anti-system. They are the system itself and the most corrupt wing of it. The prosecutor general must state whether he accepts the plea bargain, right? He has to make a statement. And I believe he won't accept it. Another issue for the prosecutor general to address: whether Daniel Vorcaro will go to Papuda or not. Because the federal police rejected Daniel Vorcaro's plea bargain and requested that he be sent to Papuda. Since there won't be any benefits from collaboration truly and fully because he is withholding information. The federal police does not accept the plea bargain and wants him to leave the federal police regional headquarters where he is being held. He's basically in a hotel suite, includes bed, air conditioning, TV, and private bathroom. They want him to go to Papuda, so the prosecutor general must also comment. My opinion about this: they have to be very careful about where they're going to put Daniel Vorcaro. For a lot of very powerful people, congressmen, senators, and so on, if Daniel Vorcaro dies, that's the best outcome they could have. Do you want to put him in Papuda? Go ahead. But there will have to be 24-hour surveillance in addition to what is provided by the prison authorities. Because today he's at risk of being silenced. Listen to what I'm saying here. I already said that last week, and I'm going to repeat it. Daniel Vorcaro, for many, would be how many of them stay out of jail. So if he goes to Papuda, they'll have to be very careful. Because they might kill him or make him commit suicide. And we know that there are cases of staged suicides within the prison system, where many times the authorities don't investigate because the person is a criminal. So unless, unfortunately, this happens. And in this case, it would mean that many white-collar criminals won't go to jail if he's killed to keep him quiet. So you have to be very careful. It's a complicated situation. It's not easy to solve. And what if the Attorney General by any chance decides that he won't go to Papuda? Even without accepting the plea bargain, you can be sure that the main aspect in the Attorney General's decision is security, so there won't be any silencing of witnesses. Did you understand, my dear? This is very serious. And I'm going to tell you something. Daniel Vorcaro is in a very serious and very delicate situation. If he is released from jail, the risk of him being murdered is very high out on the street. And depending on where he goes, the risk of a cover-up killing also increases. So public authorities need to have this vision and this expertise. Because if he becomes a target for a cover-up killing, it's over. Criminals, congressmen, senators, governors, mayors, everyone will go unpunished. They will go unpunished. And very possibly, in fact, many of them will even be reelected. Consider this a warning. This situation is very serious. Third scenario requiring the Attorney General to speak out. Alexandre de Moraes asked the Attorney General to state whether Flávio Bolsonaro and Bolsonaro should be included in the police inquiry that led to the investigation against Eduardo Bolsonaro for the crime of coercion during the course of the process, combined with Article 71, which is the crime of continued offense. By whom? By Eduardo Bolsonaro. What? Because a new fact has emerged. Homicide. In law, people talk about a supervening fact, a fact that comes afterwards. New fact. What is the new fact? One of the lines of investigation by the federal police is exactly to find out if this money that went to the Havergate fund of Eduardo Bolsonaro's lawyer, if this money is funding Eduardo Bolsonaro's luxurious lifestyle. In fact, in this video that I just showed you a little while ago, from that interview he gave to that YouTube channel, he said that he doesn't live a luxurious lifestyle. He definitely doesn't live a luxurious lifestyle in the United States, and we know that's not true. He has a very luxurious lifestyle. Living in a 6 million real house in the United States means living in real luxury, because everything there is very expensive, especially rent, actually everything. So even though the house isn't his, at least for now, he said he pays rent, and the rent for the house is 30,000 reais per month. If that's not luxury, I don't know what is. Isn't it? So the new development is that very possibly maybe the source of funding for Eduardo Bolsonaro has been found over there in the United States, which would justify in their minds, of course, him leaving a position that paid him almost 50,000 a month to be supported by money from the fund. Ravel Habergate, who went to Daniel Vorcaro's movie in Daniel Vorcaro's Mafia. Given this context, Alexandre de Moraes summoned the Attorney General to respond. Given these new facts, we have to include Flávio Bolsonaro and Bolsonaro, right? In this whole situation regarding the crime of coercion during the proceedings involving Eduardo Bolsonaro, since now there is a substantive suspicion about the source of funding for Eduardo to commit the crimes of attack against, notably the judiciary, massive tariffs, the Magnitsky Law. Do you remember all of this? Massive tariffs, Magnitsky Law, application, the suspension, the cancellation of officials' visas, and so on and so forth. Minister Alexandre de Moraes is also waiting for that from the Attorney General's office. At this point here, I realize the Attorney General's office is taking too long. Why, Andrea? Because for the Attorney General's office to decide whether to include Eduardo, Flávio Bolsonaro, and Bolsonaro, they need more information. Only the federal police can provide this information. The federal police has to provide the evidentiary framework of everything they've already found regarding this new development, so that the prosecutor general can then decide whether or not this inclusion will happen. Okay? So in a way, I even understand this delay from the prosecutor general in this regard. In the other two situations, I think he'll make his decision by Wednesday at the latest. But in this regard, I believe he's waiting for more evidence and more information from the federal police before deciding whether or not to include this. Do you understand, my dear? That's the situation. And in Eduardo Bolsonaro's case, this police investigation led to a charge against Eduardo Bolsonaro. The Supreme Court first panel accepted the charge, and now it's in the final stage. Tomorrow will be the trial of Eduardo Bolsonaro before the first panel of the Supreme Federal Court. And I invite you to join me. We will broadcast live this trial of Eduardo Bolsonaro tomorrow in the first panel of the Supreme Federal Court, with Justice Alexandre de Moraes assigned to the case. And the Prosecutor General requests that Eduardo Bolsonaro be held responsible for the crime of coercion in the course of the proceedings, combined with Article 71, which refers to continued offense, which means he could be charged with up to 7 crimes of the same kind. Not that the sentences will be added together, but there will be a possibility of increasing the sentence by up to 2/3, and it could even increase by 1/3. What does that mean? I believe he will get almost 9 years in prison, Eduardo Bolsonaro, With that, he will necessarily start in a closed prison regime. Any sentence over 8 years starts in a closed regime. This is the moment when the appeals are over because he will be able to file a motion for clarification. Then after that, he has 5 days to file. The motion for clarification is quick, usually, right? Then he will be able to file a second motion for clarification. After the second motion for clarification, that's it. Then the enforcement of the conviction begins, where officially Eduardo Bolsonaro will be considered a fugitive there in the United States. He could even be placed on Interpol's list of fugitives from Brazil. Did you understand, my dear? So that's the situation regarding Eduardo Bolsonaro. And it's interesting that Eduardo Bolsonaro waived his right to present his own defense. He didn't show up for the interrogation. The interrogation is the moment, the main moment when you, as a defendant, can present your own defense. He waived that right. He didn't retain a lawyer in the case. So what happened? The Federal Public Defender's Office was called, and he is being defended by the DPU. The DPU requested the cancellation of tomorrow's trial. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., they requested the cancellation, and Minister Alexandre de Moraes just responded. Minister Alexandre de Moraes said there will be no cancellation. That all the proceedings took place, the summons by public notice. The Public Defender's Office is handling his defense, had the opportunity for questioning, for presenting witnesses. There were final proceedings, closing arguments. The entire process took place, with the Federal Public Defender's Office representing Eduardo Bolsonaro. So Alexandre de Moraes understood that there is no reason to postpone Eduardo Bolsonaro's final judgment. I've always told you Eduardo Bolsonaro will be tried, and I believe that before the judiciary's recess in July, he will be tried and he will be convicted, and he will be. And he will be. He will be tried, and I believe he will be convicted unanimously. Today, the 4 justices who make up the first panel of the Supreme Federal Court, Alexandre de Moraes, the rapporteur, Flávio Dino, the president, Carmen Lucia, and Cristiano Zanin, I think they will convict him unanimously because he himself produced the evidence against him. Everyone remembers, guys. Everyone remembers the videos of Eduardo Bolsonaro threatening Brazil, trying to coerce the Supreme Federal Court justices so that his father wouldn't be tried, so that his father wouldn't be convicted by the Supreme Federal Court. Everyone remembers. And he made the videos, he made the documents, he produced the evidence against himself. And this time I can say that he will be convicted, and by the pela titulação, classification of the crime combined with Article 71 as a continuing offense, I believe he will get a relatively light sentence, almost 9 years in prison. And Alexandre de Moraes said no, that there will be no postponement of the trial of the Eduardo Bolsonaro, and we will follow this trial here tomorrow starting at 2 p.m. live here with you. And I believe that in this trial, we will have many messages that will be conveyed by the ministers of the Federal Supreme Court. I want to watch it with you. Okay, it's a matter of justice. They really call themselves patriots, but they're actually true traitors to the country. And even with all the threats, even with all the attempts at intimidation, Bolsonaro was sentenced to 27 years and 3 months in prison. And I always told you guys what Eduardo Bolsonaro is doing will have consequences. Then soon, when the consequences start to come, he will say that he's a poor, miserable victim, persecuted just like his father. His father messed up over and over again, and then when it happened, he said, I'm a poor, miserable victim, persecuted by the communist dictatorship of the Federal Supreme Court. And it's the same thing with Eduardo Bolsonaro. If there's a scorched earth situation in Brazil, the F-35 fighter jet or whatever, in Rio de Janeiro, in Brasilia, Brazil, bombs, I don't know what, like I said, guys, then when the consequences come, it's always, I'm a poor, miserable victim persecuted. And there's nothing about being persecuted, right? His so-called persecution is living on the gravy train like a rich man in the United States. And who's paying for that? That's what we want to know. See? That's what we want to know. I want to know who's paying the bill. There's no point in acting like a victim or pretending to be helpless now. That doesn't work. You can write this down. Eduardo Bolsonaro will be convicted. Flávio Bolsonaro is a traitor to the country, and Flávio will even lose his way home. Now we have to watch out for a setup. A setup could be coming.